the first winter of the center's construction, the workers set up a Christmas tree just outside the entrance. It was an uncanny sight to see a green fir stand in the middle of what appeared to be a no-man's land. But this tree, humbly ordained with strings of cranberries, buttons, and tin cans, greatly affected me. It demonstrated that even in the darkest of times, the American people will light the beacons of hope. I thought it could be the start of a great and inspiring tradition, so I traveled north to Babylon in search of a Christmas tree for the following year.
For 12 days and 12 nights, Mr. Rockefeller looked for the best tree in the forest. How about this one, Mr. Rockefeller? No, it's much too short. How about this one, Mr. Rockefeller? No, it's much too tall. How about this one, Mr. Rockefeller? No, it's much too average. Mr. Rockefeller soon feared that he would leave empty-handed. Then, on the 12th night, just as he was packing up his stuff, Mr. Rockefeller heard the sweetest tune in the air. It sounded as though the very wind itself had fallen in love. He and his men followed the song and found themselves at the base of a very, very special tree. How about this one, Mr. Rockefeller? It's perfect. For the rest of the night, the men swung their axes at the special tree. Chop, chop, chop. However, when the sun rose, the tree was still standing. Their axes had left no marks at all. Mr. Rockefeller was surprised. The next day, Mr. Rockefeller and his men laid 100 sticks of dynamite around the tree. 3, 2, 1, boom! Yet, the special tree continued to stand. Mr. Rockefeller was surprised. So Mr. Rockefeller decided to hire the best team of grave diggers to take the tree out of the ground. After a week of digging, they told Mr. Rockefeller, "The tree will be out in 3 years at this rate." Mr. Rockefeller was surprised, but he decided to let the grave diggers work. He would pick the next 3 best trees for the next 3 Christmases. But by the 4th year, the special tree was ready to display.
For the last 2 years, I have seldom mentioned the tragedy that occurred at the center. Many have taken offense at my silence, claiming it to be the result of a desensitization to workplace accidents. Indeed, I have seen enough accidents in 3 lifetimes, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened at the center. For some time now, my friends have blamed the center's original construction workers for the tragedy, since it was their very own Christmas tree that had started the whole tradition. But the truth is that their tree brought joy and wonder to the public. It was my tree, and my tree alone, that brought about the unprecedented loss.
On a cold December morning in Midtown Manhattan, Rockefeller's men slowly raised the special tree. Heave ho! Heave ho! Heave ho! By the afternoon, the special tree stood tall and still. It was unlike any other tree, having no color, branches, or leaves. The mayor of New York, Mr. Guardia, thought that the tree was too bare and asked for branches to be added so that ornaments could be hung. Mr. Rockefeller didn't agree. He thought the tree was perfect, just the way it was. But since Mayor Guardia had been one of his best friends, Mr. Rockefeller told his men to glue some branches on. I, Virginia, watched as the men placed branches on the special tree. I had saved my money for over 9 months to purchase a little star ornament because I wanted to be the very first person to decorate the Rockefeller Christmas tree. It laid in my pocket while I watched because I planned to hang my ornament as soon as the tree was standing. After the final branch had been added and all the men left, I quickly ran up to the tree. But to my astonishment, the lowest branch of the tree was over twice my height. I jumped as high as I could, but still, the lowest branch was out of my reach. I was very disappointed. I wanted to be the very first person to decorate the tree, but now I had no chance. Unless I called my friends. At once, I began counting my friends on my fingers. There was Helen, Charles, Elizabeth, Alice, Joseph, Elsie, Orville, Edith, Olive, and Philip. 10 friends that I could ask for help. Then I realized that 10 friends standing on each other's shoulders could put me at the very top of the Christmas tree. My star could be the first and the tallest. Without a second to spare, I ran from door to door asking for help. Knock, knock, knock. Helen, are you there? Knock, knock, knock. Charles, are you there? Knock, knock, knock. Elizabeth, are you there? Eventually, I gathered all 10 of my friends at the bottom of the Rockefeller Christmas tree. I told them my plan, to have them all stand on each other and form a ladder for me to climb to the top. My friends understood my excitement, and they quickly started to climb onto each other's shoulders. Ow! Helen had stepped on Charles' fingers. Ow! Charles had stepped on Elizabeth's fingers. Ow! Elizabeth had stepped on Alice's fingers. After many groans and tumbles, my friends formed a sturdy ladder, and I began to climb. My joy grew with every passing face, and before I knew it, I was at the very top, looking down at the tree. My ladder of friends swayed back and forth, and occasionally felt like it was about to collapse. But I tuned out the movement and focused on the tree. Closer, friends, closer. Then I secured the metal star at the top of the tree. It was perfect. Hooray! Victory! I'm the first! Just then, there was a strange sound. The tree began to shake. Its glued branches fell off all at once, and the entire tree slowly bent backwards. Soon, the very top of it touched the ground, forming a perfect arc. It was like a very strange rainbow. My heart sank as I saw my star gently slide to the ground from the tree's top. Bolts of lightning then shot out from inside the arc of the tree, producing thunderous booms. The lightning scared my friends and me. We all tumbled to the ground and ran in all directions, but the lightning caught up to us. I was blinded by a great white light. I remember when my eyes adjusted, I was in a field of special trees, and I saw... In a flash, I returned to the street where my friends and I had been struck by the lightning. We were all on the ground, being attended to by other people. I had scratched my legs badly, and I could see that my friends were also hurt. I looked up at the Rockefeller buildings, and I thought that they looked a little different. The whole street looked a little different, and the special tree was nowhere in sight.
It is only natural for the reader at this point to wonder why the incident has been referred to as a tragedy. There had been no loss of life, and, aside from a few temporary scorch marks on the center, no damage to the surrounding property. I too assumed it was a mostly inconsequential event, likely an electrical accident whose effects were exaggerated by the children at the scene. I was grateful that every life involved had been spared. A death at the center would have weighed heavily on my mind for some time. But when I encountered the results of the children's medical examinations, I wished that a death had occurred in place of the unfathomable.
My ma and pa visited me at the hospital, but they looked completely different. Ma looked worried. After she wiped her tears, she asked, "Did you hang your bear at the Rockefeller tree?" I answered, "It wasn't a bear. I was going to hang a star." To which they asked, "What do you mean?" Pa asked, "Where did you get these clothes?" I answered, "These are my clothes, the ones you helped me put on this morning." To which they asked, "What do you mean?" My ma then asked, "Why are there dots all over your face?" I answered, "Those are my freckles. I've had them since I was little." To which they asked, "What do you mean?" My parents quietly left my bed and talked to my friends' parents. Then they all started to cry and yell. The nurses made them leave, which made me feel better. None of us thought that our real parents had visited, but they all did feel familiar. Orville and Philip were especially shaken. They didn't even share the same last name with their parents. The nurses tried to convince us that those who had visited us were our parents, and that we would come around to properly greet them after we healed. But it was hard to believe. Whenever I looked out the window, I saw that Manhattan looked different from memory. Mr. Rockefeller himself was kind enough to visit us in the hospital. He asked us whether we were okay, and then after some time, he and the nurses began to ask us some very easy questions about American history. With every reply, they would chuckle and shake their heads, until I told Mr. Rockefeller who I thought he was. He chuckled at first, and then became silent, as if the simple fact had deeply affected him. He had asked all my friends a few more questions about himself, and with each answer, he seemed a little more scared. Mr. Rockefeller quietly stood with the nurses for a while, before he wished us a Merry Christmas and left. That evening, the nurses took x-rays of us to make sure we hadn't broken our ribs. Usually, those taking the x-rays are more than happy to show their patients what the pictures looked like. But when I asked to see them, the nurses ignored me. I didn't fall asleep that night. I kept my ear close to the wall to hear what the nurses were saying next door. I heard one sentence over and over. "Everything's backward." I wonder what they meant by that. I never told my friends, because I didn't want to scare them. But I spent the rest of the night with my hand to my chest, wondering if my heart was ever on the right side.
For several weeks, the children were kept under observation at the Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. I visited them as soon as I had the chance to. All the families of these children were deeply unsettled, for they had all independently come to the conclusion their child had been replaced by a doppelganger. They claimed that these new sons and daughters possessed substantial differences from their real children. The majority of differences involved altered physical attributes and the inability to recognize familiar locations and characters, such as their parents and their homes. 2 boys even claimed to have names different to those that their mothers had given them at birth. But of all the discrepancies, the most bizarre was their faulty recollections of notable persons and events. For instance, each of the affected children claimed that I had become the wealthiest man in America through an oil monopoly. It is common knowledge that I did indeed work at an oil refinery in my youth, but to entirely deny my 2 terms as president and insist instead that I had always been a mere philanthropist struck me as being particularly odd. The families were agonized by the children's behavior. Some continued to search for their real children. I support their endeavors, for I do not believe that the children's afflictions were the result of hysteria. Every day I find myself recollecting the day that I had selected the tree. I have since realized the difficulties involved in the removal of it should have repeatedly discouraged me. And had I been discouraged, the families of those children would not be experiencing the anguish that they currently have. Perhaps I never had the opportunity to select another tree. Perhaps I was meant to select that tree regardless of my persistent character. Perhaps we are all trolleys, forced to follow the path of the track to each of our destinations. I take solace in that thought. Or perhaps the tree chose me.